Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jo Shaw. I'm Deputy Head of the College of Humanities and Social Science, and it's my privilege and pleasure this evening to welcome you to the inaugural lecture by Professor Federica Pedriali, who's actually been a professor since 2008, so she's pretty much worn the chair out already, and she'll be getting it recovered. But it's delightful that she's found a really good time to do this inaugural lecture at a time which coincides with some great events that she and others have organised, which is part of the Edinburgh sort of GADA Festival and Prize and Plays and Conference. And in a way, that sort of sums up our pride and pleasure in having Federica's inaugural here today. She'll be talking on the title in a moment of GADA Goes to War, on becoming militant in the life of the militants of literature. And very much our inaugural lectures here in Edinburgh are part of a celebration of life and work and people's commitment to an institution and the institution's commitment to them. And Federica is someone who's been at the University of Edinburgh since 1990, so that's considerably longer than I've been here, and probably many other people as well, although not as long an attachment to the university as some of the people I see who've come back, her former colleagues, retired emeritus professors whom we're delighted to see back at the university for this type of occasion, so welcome to all of you. So Federica is one of these one-women institutions, or possibly two institution women. She's worked at the University of Edinburgh since 1990, rising rapidly from a lectureship to a readership and then to a chair of something which I need to read out because it's quite long, as many of you might know, Literary Metatheory and Modern Italian Studies. But before that, she was at the University of Genoa doing her undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. So she's a two-institution woman, and I think that's probably a good thing to be as well. So certainly since she came to Edinburgh, Federica's had an astonishingly distinguished career. She's been awarded prizes for her books, such as the Nuovo Lettere Prize. She's a really distinguished figure in the canon, in relation to understanding the Italian modernist canon. Of course, GADA, her work on GADA is a shining light in that. And she's established, she's got so many distinctions that I couldn't possibly read them out. We'd be here literally all night if I did that. But I would just say, as it were, on behalf of the college, what is really distinctive about Federica is that not only does she do really outstanding work in and of herself, but she also gets it out there in such an effective way through establishing the Edinburgh GADA Prize, by establishing a journal, which she's an editor of, by working with scholars near and far. And in that context, it's great to see people here, both from the city of Edinburgh, but also scholars from as far away as Dundee, no, as far away as Bologna, Geneva, Utrecht, Rome, Bari, Pisa, Galway, Bologna, and so on. And I think Federica has a quite remarkable network of scholars with whom she's in touch. I've been watching as people come in. They're clearly coming from far away. There's the biggest suitcase I've seen in a long time that's been brought to this inaugural. And I'm sure that this is also a lecture which will be watched on the internet as well and will become an important resource for colleagues and students alike to look at. So Federica has been at the forefront of using digital means to promote and disseminate humanities research, and that's something that is absolutely central to the vision for the College of Humanities and Social Science, and it's clear that she's galvanized a huge number of people to understand and engage with this very important subject. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Professor Federica Pedriali, again, the Professor of Literary Metatheory and Modern Italian Studies, who will lecture to us for about 45 minutes on GADA Goes to War, on becoming militant in the name of the militants of literature. And we will have a reception at the end of the lecture to which you'll all be invited. And should anybody want to ask questions, we can also have that as an option at the end. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Let me do one thing. It's to move over here. I'm a digital person. I want to forsake the digital tonight. Allow me to do that for the once. Now, the idea is that by forsaking the digital or the support that any way technology can give me, I'm taking a riskier stance. Please note, I like that meta element in my job. Please note that I've forsaken the comfort of computer, smartboards, lecterns, notes. In a sense, I want to use the technology of the body tonight for my lecture. And the technology of the body that is compounded by two things primarily, i.e., I'm here taking this risky stance, body connecting to mind, connecting to a projecting voice. This is what I'm counting on, and hopefully it will work. Now, why am I taking this stance? I've got a quotation for you that is ready to come in and to welcome you to the world of Gadda. My work is the result of my physiology. Quite possibly, this first quotation for tonight's lecture, it's likely to be your first ever quotation from Gadda. I'm counting on you not being familiar with my author. And in a sense, this is my entry point into the night. Welcome to the war. Now, you think that I'm in a risky position, but actually you are the one that are going to go to war in the next few days. And if I've got to peg your interest, your curiosity for the subject somewhere, I'll just say this, given that classifications are useful, unfortunately, let's say this, that having gone through a number of qualifiers that could qualify my author so that you can peg your interest somewhere, I'll say, well, Carlo Emilio Gadda is the Italian James Joyce. What about it? It does work. It has got currency. You can defend it. You can counter-argue it. But certainly Gadda did write his Ulysses. He did not write his Finnegan's Wake. He did do something that is very major in Italian literature. So the next argument that comes along from you, because you're doing already the arguing for me, is that actually, how come? How come that is that you're not familiar with this author? If we're dealing with somebody as big and as great as the Italian James Joyce, classification accepted, then how come that you don't already know, or that your familiarity with the subject is limited? What is the issue and what is the problem? In a sense, your argument will be that had it been great enough for export, it would have reached you. Had been possible to commercialize Gadda in a profitable way, you would have known about him. Instead, this has not been the case. I mean, the Italian canon of the 20th century has traveled well. Calvino, Tabucchi, Eco, Pirandello, Svevo, they've reached you somehow. How come the Carlo Emilio Gadda has not really, or not sufficiently? Now, in a sense, you're right to question his right to be here tonight. And it's not enough that I've been mobilizing dissemination globally for now nearly 12 years in order to prove the point that even though he tosses about complexities about Italy, his country, well, you are arguing still that he's not ready for export, and quite rightly so. So what can we do for you? I think that this week, by the way, the brochures are available on your table, so you can start leafing through and take them away, please. They are for you to take. What the brochure is doing is actually putting to you the case in a compact format. This week is the Gaddus week. Gadda loved to call himself Gaddus. He had lots of pseudonyms for himself, and this is one of them, obviously aggrandizing his Gadda surname. Now, Gadda loved to be at the center of attention, but he has still got to grab it for you. And now what we have for you as part of this week, it's something of an emergency biscuit, of an energizing something. It may be tough to go into your pack. And what does it comprise? It comprises, well, a postgraduate training school. You're welcome to come. It comprises this inaugural. This is part and parcel of the mission, the battle, the coming together. It comprises a junior side of the event. I'm very proud of that, and I'm very pleased that the juniors involved are all here supporting this inaugural. And that means that there is a group of international people coming from Italy, but also from Scotland, coming together for a training project that involves handling, work that is inspired by the hybridity of modern cultural life. And so they are, in a sense, they too are celebrating Gadda. What else is there? Well, there is the centerpiece of it all, and that is a show. A UK premiere at the Travers, on for 2 nights. I want to be part of that audience because I want to see you in combat, in a sense, to come to terms with the starkness, the bleakness, the voice that will arise from that show. I'm lucky enough to have met Fabrizio Gifuni, and I actually have got to thank one of my scholar guests for that opportunity, Paola Italia from Rome, who is here tonight, for that meeting that was so decisive in bringing together the project for this week. And Fabrizio Gifuni, the person who has given us that fantastic show, L'Ingegner Gadda va alla guerra, is also here tonight, giving up rehearsal time. And I must say, I'm again humbled by your generosity and kindness. You're here tonight to be part of this inaugural because everything is coming together, in a sense, to prove what? That actually, this week, in a sense, is ideal. Because you have got in front of you, most of you, I'm assuming, most of you have got a blank canvas. Gadda for you is primarily something that may have a few scribbled, it's a scribbled canvas, but not much more. Yes, modernist, yes, James Joyce. What else? What next? Yes, I've just said that he did write his Ulysses, but he didn't write his Finnegan's Wake. There are also some of the Gadda students up there, and yes, they're taking notes already. 1 semester ahead of the course. Thank you for coming also. But what is the complementing side to this all? The complementing side to this all is this, that what Fabrizio is going to do in the next couple of nights is to show you that that blankness, that blank canvas that you got, is actually coming together and meeting his message. And the message is about this bidding starkness that can be identified at the center of this proliferating magma that is the Gadda world. So in a sense, you're being introduced to something that is the ideal introducing means to Gadda, a monologue rather than an entire chorus or than an entire opera. You don't have an opera house there. You have all the voices that Fabrizio will be able to produce on the night. And that, I think, is the ideal coming together of two realities. As I said, you're not being familiar with and, in a sense, having to fill with something your canvas, and the fact that from that stark center, which is the mind-body theater connection that is Gadda, is coming together at the Travers. So here we are, ready for the adventure. Now, in order for you to go equipped to the Travers, and I hope that many of you will be taking advantage of this opportunity, also because it is, again, complemented by other elements, by other stuff, and that is pre-shows, post-shows, public debates, the hybridity installation that you are preparing and already working on, and I'm talking to the juniors here. Well, take advantage of that opportunity, but have something ready in your pack. And this is what I'm here for tonight. There are two elements. Of all the elements that I could identify, I want to use, basically, once again, the Gadda Goes to War theme, and this is a straight translation of the Italian title of the show, L'Ingegner Gadda va alla guerra, so Gadda goes to war. I want to use that theme. I want to use that starkness. I want to use that relevance. I mean, this show has been immensely popular and immensely successful in Italy for some reason. Now, can we transfer it? Can we translate it here? Obviously, it will be a tough call, because clearly there isn't the public here for that particular author. And yet we can get going, and yet we can get battling for this particular modernist. So, having to give you some ingredients, having to give you something to make your biscuit to take along, your emergency ration, as I've called it in my blurb as well, which is part of a preface to the forthcoming book, Gadda Goes to War, I would say this. Yes, Gadda did go to 2 European wars, European world wars they were. Yes, his world experience was shattered. However, yes, he came back and basically his world had also had the final push to shape. There were preceding traumas, there were preceding problems, there were preceding realities that in a sense took further shape thanks to the war experience. Yes, he did write novels that are not novels. He did write essays that are not essays. He did write short stories that are not short stories. Yes, he's a modernist. And like most modernists, at the center of his work, there is a narrative about the self. It is true that his world is very crowded, extremely populated. And it's true that he attempts many literary forms. At the same time, if you dig deep, if you take the stark position that is coming from the stage of Fabrizio, of the Gadda Goes to War show, well, then you can identify that narrative about the self hiding or taking the center. I've forsaken. The center follows you. I've not really forsaken the center. I may have forsaken the technology, but not the center. And what actually cognitive science, philosophy, and other hard and soft sciences are proving is that the nervous system, ultimately, however shaken by war, by history, by time, by the shaping force of time, is actually very resilient. And what Gadda, in his having been tested by time, proves is that actually his narrative is still holding on. Fragmented, plurilingualism, experimentalism, all of that are taking shape within a narrative that holds its ground and its center. First of all, the appearance of the page. Gadda is the greatest possible master of the Italian language. His talent is absolutely huge. In a sense, if you want to look across the canon, you can cast your eye or you can cast your gaze as far back as Dante. Please do. And you will find that he's got lessons to teach to nearly all the greatest masters in the language. He's a technical writer. He's got great energy leaps. He's got huge discontinuities. He's a perfect rhetorician. How come that his page is difficult to follow? It's saturated to the brim. There is too much page. And the problem is also that you as readers have got habits, customs. You're already conditioned by the way you read. And there is a coming again at battle of 2 different forces. One is a writing force that Gadda can display and sustain, and the reader, the way he has been conditioned to read. There is an issue of speed. There is an issue of sustainability. The page, however breathable material, the page is breathable matter, printed matter, but it's not breathing matter. One thing that we can do for that page that is so saturated and rich and overwhelming for the reader to follow, we can actually return it to the voice. And once again, if we return Gadda's page to the voice, we may come to the theatre. This is why, in Italy, the theatre that comes out of Gadda's work has been extremely popular and successful. Fabrizio is not alone in having attempted to take a writer that has never really written for the theatre to the theatre. He has been particularly successful in daring to do what he has done, taking 2 texts that no one would have expected to work, in a sense, for the stage. But he's not alone in that one. And what that proves is that what we need to do with Gadda, given the intensity of his writing and the mastery on the language, Italy and Italian are his duchy, are his domain. So considering that he's the master of it all, the God incarnate of his technique, then we've got to bring him back to the body, where he can show that actually the breathing is what dictates the writing. So if we want to have a good introduction to Gadda, I think that the good introduction to Gadda can come rightly or correctly as we're doing just now. We're taking you, most of you, hopefully, to the theatre to have that experience of the vocal range that Gadda can display. One thing that is amazingly beautiful about this writer is the resonance, the mastery that he has got of the rhythms, of the leaps, of the discontinuity that he produces, thanks to that breathing that goes on while he's writing. And that voice that casts itself as polyphonic then returns to the center of the body, of the subjectivity that has generated it. Compromised as it is in a myriad of selves, at the same time it comes back to the one source of projection. And that is, I think, a recipe for successful entry into the world of Gadda. What about a bit of theory? I think that that's the other element that might help us in our work, in our going to battle with this author. His very first, or basically his best first critic, Gianfranco Contini, in his very first essay on Carlo Emilio Gadda in the 1930s, in the very first sentence of this essay, says, "Gadda è importante per la teoria." He doesn't say much more, and is immensely puzzling because of that. And in not providing more, let's say, more, more to it, not saying more about it, it leaves you tantalized and puzzled and, in a sense, on a quest. What does it mean that Gadda is important for theory? My reading has been, that's why the subtitle of my course, my honours course at Edinburgh, is Gadda, un test per la teoria. Quale teoria? Any theory. Any theory can be tested on Gadda because, once again, all the theories that he adopts, he is a very technical writer, a very knowledgeable writer. He has basically handled most soft and hard sciences. What he does is put them under such stress and under such pressure that somehow they will give way. And in that giving way, they will reveal the basic contradiction. What is the self? The self is the emerging consciousness produced, the emerging something produced by a body system. Let's say by the metabolic system, primarily. The self is meant to conduct, to lead, to allow the body unit to produce behavior within a collective group society. The body is constitutionally gregarious. It loves to be trained. It loves to be drilled. It loves the nation. It loves the army. Gadda is one such body. He adopts all those theories. He's ready to go with the mantra, cogito ergo sum. He's ready to obey. He's ready to love order and discipline. Within that order and discipline, he discovers what system means, what aspiration means, what the public means, and is ready to take on the extreme challenge, which is to join up, to go to war. He did volunteer. He was one of those. He believed that the war would be right. He was also ready later on to join the fascist party because, again, that too made sense. You want dignity and you want order and you want control. Yes, cogito ergo sum cum, in the sense that you've got to be with. You've got to be with the plurality of the others and become one of the others through your giving up on the exclusivity of your singularity. The singularity is a matter of the physiological. There is only that genetic pool that can belong to you, and you are the result of that genetic pool. You inhabit that genetic pool through your coming into it. At one point you will ask, come entra un'anima in uno schema? How does the soul enter a shape, a schema? its pattern, its paradigm, its genetic pool, as I've called it? How does it become one with its destiny and with its fate? And that fate then, singular as it has got then to become part of the collective effort. Italy is the collective effort. Italy is the ultimate paradigm. The leader must be touched, sensed, listened to. It must become something that you adopt within you as a conviction, as a belief. And yet, and that's a problem, and yet, because for a subject that is so ready to go for it, then the and yet is the fact that the verification that you do in the real life out there, in the army, in the trenches out there, in the coming back from the war camps, in the coming back to a society that is collapsing. And it's not just the historical trauma, and it's not just the historical mess of Italy after World War I. It's also the larger anthropological quest and problem that being based in Italy opens up. It's not that just because Italy has a particular terrain, a topsoil that generates a certain type of problems, Gadda is limited to that range of problems. His travels take him worldwide. Coming back to Italy, which he does with great homesickness, means to him that he realizes that what he experiences elsewhere is exactly the same as what he has experienced before leaving. So the leaving made no sense. It only made him morally stranded. So the pool is the morality of the nation. And yet, again, and yet that nation, that's the problem. The value system on which the nation, the country, the army, the family, the individual relations, all of that is based on an ultimate and utter mistake. Because as we commit our energy to that particular energy, which is the one above us, the order above us, the order of reason, what it reveals that actually matter organizes itself on a basic laziness, on a basic commitment to whatever comes along. So the principle of selection, which Gadda is ready to commit his life to, and that means he is ready to die in the trenches, which is not easy when you've got the entire life in front of you. Okay, it was a fashion, you could say. The boys in his age group would go. So it's not unusual for someone in his age group to go, but he did go. He did commit his energy, his life to that experience. But it does come back to experience the unreason of the collective as it has been sort of unfolding itself, starting from the experience in the trenches, coming on and back from, the war camps, and so on and so forth. This is the problem, the clash, the mismatch between belief and hope and the realization that actually the cosmos ultimately, not just Italy, the Denmark that is in every nation, and I'm talking about Hamlet's Denmark, is actually a time out of joint. And the subject, like Hamlet, with the same dignity, with the same disease within, has got an obligation to point out, but the pointing out makes you, in a sense, diseased and weak, as Foucault would like to class it. It's the necessary disease produced by the very system that requires you to be either standardized or diseased, because if you are diseased, it means that you're not standardized. And Gadda is the singular subject that realizes that the decision point, at some point it does come up, and it's not actually a decision that you can take because it is a genetics deciding what you're going to become as well. And so the question must be asked at source and must be asked of the God that we construct. Immortal as he is, the God we construct is the supreme narcissist. Immortal and constructed as we created is the one that wants a world in his own image. That, unfortunately, you can reason it as much as you like from whatever and from as many perspectives as you want. But ultimately that, taken out of a religious context, is a narcissistic proposition. the God of creation creates within his own image. If you fit as the emerging subject from matter, the subject emerging from matter, if you fit that proposition, fine, you're accepted. You're part of the standardized clan, those who go through war and come back still as conformed units of being. If you instead resist, if you instead offer a critique, if instead you say, yes, I'm ready for the cogito ergo sum cum, and yet you refuse me because I'm simply saying, look, there is something that doesn't add up, well, then you do have the suffering subject that Gadda was, and that so many in his generations were. And this is where your unknown soldier, the one that in a sense is beginning to shape up from or on your canvas, is the unknown soldier of world literature. He belongs to that group of people who did dare become militant without being militant. And that's another point where I become militant myself, and I'm nearly drawing to a sort of conclusion, but it's not there yet. Part of the title of today's lecture was on becoming militant in the name of the militants of literature. There is a bit of a repetition here, and it's meant to be there. In a sense, it had to stress what you can do and ask the question, what can we do for literature, for this type of literature in particular, that is so vulnerable. Vulnerable because it didn't have a circulation that it deserved in the case of Gadda in particular. But it's vulnerable in general because it's positing that the subject, at best, has got to be either sacrificed or discarded, which amounts to the same thing. So the utter singularity of this rising of mind and body together to say, I'm here to be used, to be spent, please do spend me as best as you can, is sacrificed for no purpose whatsoever, simply because unreason will rule the way. And Gadda, in his non-militance, but in his bravery, in his experimental, plurilingual, intransitive, untranslatable, tossing about of complexities, is giving us exactly the issue and the problem. His writing is excessive, always. It doesn't fit any standard. You ask him, how come that you write in this way? And this is the title of one of his essays, Come lavoro, and he turns it immediately in Come non lavoro, which for him ultimately amounts to the same thing. He does his work from the background, from the darkness. His writing is like a Caravaggio, an audiovisual Caravaggio, full of voices, full of accusations, full of lights, shadow, casting grace on some and withdrawing grace from others. There are issues for this non-religious writer, there are issues of grace and ungrace, conceding, giving grace, and refusing it. And Gadda writes his crucifixion of St. Peter, the conversion of St. Paul, all the Caravaggios that he loved, he rewrites them, in a sense, in his fiction, or in his essay writing, in his short story writing. He does it from exactly the same perspective, the painterly and the acoustic, the voice and the body portrayed. The body at the center may be receiving the light. Caravaggio is known for his light, for the casting of Great on St. Matthew's as part of his conversion. But what about the rest who are not including? And what is the principle of selection? Who runs the schema? And what about the schema just being just matter? So ultimately, the accusation goes right at the center of the issue, and that is life. You can be angry because there is Mussolini, but ultimately, even Mussolini is the expression of matter rising into a system that is historically recognizable as Italy. So Italy is the paradigm, and it has got to be something you're not ashamed of, which Gadda never was, even though he was extremely critical. It is something you're not ashamed of because it's so innately universal. And this is the militance of this literature. And in a sense, I offer it to you also because the show, which is always at the back of my mind as part of this Gaddus Week, the show has been immensely popular in Italy. It has had 121, 22 performances. It had made its mark. It has left, you know, a mark on basically contemporary society. People have been wondering, but who is this writer that writes in this way? Is that Fabrizio? Is Fabrizio perhaps, you know, giving, saying that this is Gadda? In reality, it is his commentary on contemporary Italy. In reality, that text that we're going to listen tomorrow or watched tomorrow night and on Saturday is actually entirely Gadda's. And what it's putting to us is the universality of that problem, if you want, of the problem that I've highlighted in this compact and compressed manner for you tonight. But it's also something that can travel far and wide and really reaching out to any audience, even those who don't know Gadda. And now I'll draw things together, because in a sense I've felt for a long time that Gadda could reach out beyond the academic domain. And I want to thank everybody for having allowed me to do so. And it has been most important that Edinburgh, as a university, has been most supportive of this. So my thanks go first to the principal, because the principal has been one of the first people to support this project. Really, years ago, I started seeing into this as, you know, something with, you know, potential to grow. Then I want to thank my heads of college, and by that I mean a series of people who have been most successful and, most supportive of what I've done. Vicky Bruce, David Ferguson, and now Dorothy Miel. I also want to thank the head of school, the heads of school that we've had and that have looked into my project. Peter Graves, Greg Walker, and now Jeremy Robbins. Thank you very much indeed. I want to thank the scholars who have been part of my networks now for a number of years and who have supported, you know, Emilio, Paola, Claudio, Giorgio. They've all supported the growth of this idea of a new concept, I think, about the dissemination of this immensely difficult but also immensely rewarding kind of author. I want to thank my colleagues in DELC and in LLC, which means School and the Modern European Language Division. I want to thank my Italian colleagues. I want to thank my students, because it is with them over the years since 2000, when I first started teaching Gadda, that actually I explored these ideas. They became books, they became, you know, the website, they became now, you know, the Edinburgh Gadda Prize. But in reality, it all started with the students in my class. And there is this glorious class of 2000, which was really, you know, the motivator for me to go into the website. So even though they're not here tonight, thank you all, students. I want to thank the helpers who this week are really doing a lot of work on behalf of the project. And thank you very much, because it is a grueling week. I've packed so much in it. I wanted it to be actually, like Gadda, proliferating with aspects, you know, with offerings, with providing you with biscuits, as I said before. I want to thank, in particular, Fabrizio Gifuni for being inspirational to us all, but being also the most amazing honorary president of the Edinburgh Gadda Prize for, as I said, for abandoning the Travers and coming over here tonight, and for also, you know, having produced this magnificent show. Thank you very much indeed. I want to thank particularly a brilliant mentor of mine, and also someone who is not here tonight, who has been another brilliant mentor of mine. And by that I mean the two professors of Italian, Professor Peter Brand, who is here tonight, and Professor Lino Pertile, who is sending his good wishes. And I want to thank them really very warmly, because they've been fantastic supporters over many, many, many years. I want to reserve a little thought for my father and his partner, who cannot be here. I want to thank Walter, who is up there, because he's a fantastic supporter of mine. Walter, my husband, by the way. But lastly, the night is really dedicated to that string of young people who have come from Italy, who have been involved out of, I don't know what, passion for the topic, wanting to explore things about themselves, wanting to test themselves, wanting to discover what it was all about. By sending your submission by now some time ago, you've become part of this family. And I was really very keen that you would be coming up here as part of your win of the Italian Gadda Giovani 2011 last year. So you're here tonight, you're going to be part of this week. Make the most, as I wish everybody can make of what's coming up. And thank you very much for your attention. I hope I've been useful. Thank you.
Well, colleagues, friends, visitors, and all those who've come from near and far to hear Federica's powerful extempore sort of re-envisioning of a powerful force in Italian modernist literature. So thank you very much for that.
This production is brought to you by the University of Edinburgh.